Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we'll bring you closer to the world's largest inland sea, home to flamingos, seal, and sturgeon. A sea so vast it once looked endless on a map. Now imagine it receding so fast that fishing ports sit stranded in deserts and oil rigs need their own canals just to stay afloat. Welcome to the Caspian, a giant body of water drying up before our very eyes. Now, for most of history, the Caspian seemed eternal. It's bigger than Japan, stretches across 5 countries, and has been the heart of trade and culture since antiquity. 15 million people still depend directly on its waters, but now the sea is pulling back, not by meters, but by tens of kilometers in some places. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The South Caucasus and Central Asia are facing a very dire environmental crisis. The Caspian Sea has been shallowing, and many are now concerned that this inland body of water may soon share the fate of the Aral Sea.
The Caspian is very much at risk. They are predicting another decline of up to 18 meters in this century, devastating the economies of the countries.
The Caspian Sea is one of the world's most recognizable ones. Nestled between Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran and Azerbaijan, it has been a vital part of these countries and their predecessors' economies for centuries. Should the Caspian Sea's water level continue to go down, it will affect a variety of industries in the region, from oil and fishing to even tourism.
We are already seeing the manifestation of this environmental disaster with the naked eye.
The sea life will suffer measurable harm and the entire region's climate will be affected. Populations in the region which are struggling with water shortages will find themselves in a humanitarian disaster as well. The countries surrounding the Caspian Sea have openly spoken about this situation. Kazakhstan has kicked off an international program meant to help save the Caspian Sea. Astana has proposed creating a unified digital platform for water resources. This platform would allow for accurate hydrogeological monitoring, which would help combat the problem. For now, the process is still deemed reversible, but it will require immediate action.
And now, let's zone in on the east-plaining portion of our show. The Caspian Sea has been subject to economic and environmental exploitation for decades. While the sea has been a crucial part of the region's economy for centuries, this exploitation hadn't begun in earnest until the mid-20th century.
Following the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Union began to harness its resources in earnest as part of its economic policy. One such resource is the Caspian Sea and its vast reserves of oil and sea life. Extensive oil and fishing projects were developed in and around the sea, and their impact can still be seen today. After the fall of the Soviet Union, countries like Russia took over this extensive infrastructure and continued this process of exploitation regardless of the consequences. Much of this infrastructure is more than half a century old, and the price of upgrading or updating it is not seen as worth the effort by some countries, which compounds the environmental threat that, for example, old oil platforms or derelict ships continue to pose. What's more, the Soviet Union also diverted several rivers away from the Caspian Sea to pursue its agricultural policies, which has been contributing to the reduced flow of fresh water and a rise in salinity. These processes have never been truly reversed, and while the region's nations are trying to fix the issue, the shadow of the Soviet Union's exploitation lingers over all of them.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. What was once a coastline is becoming desert. The numbers tell the story. Since 2000s, the Caspian sea level has been dropping by about 6 centimeters per year. Since 2020, the decline has accelerated to 30 centimeters annually. Now, this July, Russian scientists confirmed the sea had fallen below the lowest level ever recorded in a modern era. Even in the best case climate scenario, the Caspian could lose 10 meters of depth by the end of the century. In the worst case, 18. Now that's a height of a 6-story building gone from the waterline. Part of the reason is climate change, but it's not the whole story. During the Soviet era, the Caspian already suffered from reckless irrigation projects and heavy pollution. But what we are seeing now goes beyond poor planning. Add to that reduced rainfall, rivers running shallower, and evaporation outpacing inflows, and you've got a tragedy in the making. The Volga, the Caspian's main artery, can no longer keep up. And because much of the northern Caspian is only 5 meters deep, even a small decline empties enormous areas. 4 out of 10 ecosystem types unique to the Caspian could vanish completely. The Caspian seal, already endangered, could lose more than 80% of its breeding grounds. Sturgeon, prized for the caviar but already pushed to the edge, would lose access to vital spawning rivers. Toxic dust released from dried seabeds, as happened with the Aral Sea, could blow across communities, damaging health and agriculture. The disaster is not only ecological or human, it is also economic. Ports are already being abandoned. Aktau in Kazakhstan and Baku in Azerbaijan now require constant dredging to stay connected. Oil and gas companies must dig new channels to reach offshore rigs. Billions of dollars are being spent to keep infrastructure alive, costs that will only rise as the shoreline retreats further. And let's not forget geopolitics. The Caspian is central to the Middle Corridor, a trading route linking China to Europe that bypasses Russia. If ships can't sail and ports can't function, that corridor becomes another mirage. Meanwhile, the 5 Caspian countries, Azerbaijan, Iran, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Turkmenistan, are scrambling to adapt. Ports are being relocated. New shipping channels are being carved, but here's the catch. Adaptation isn't quick enough. The truth is, the Caspian's decline is faster than the pace of politics. Agreements exist, but cooperation is slow and mistrust runs deep. For the 15 million people around the Caspian shores and for the species that have nowhere else to go, the clock is ticking. The sea is shrinking. The question is, will action come before it disappears? And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Pannier, a board member of the Caspian Policy Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
So today we're trying to examine the economic as well as environmental exploitation of the Caspian Sea. And as I understood, this didn't really happen until the past couple of decades. Can you help us outline what has happened?
Well, I think the starting point is obviously the oil and gas business. For a while there wasn't a whole lot of exploitation of the Caspian Sea, certainly during the Soviet era, for instance, when most of the focus was within the Soviet Union was on the Siberian fields and the ones way up north on past the Arctic Circle. Once the Soviet Union collapsed and you had 5 states sharing the Caspian Sea as opposed to 2 that had shared the Caspian Sea, everyone was trying to cash in, get some revenue for their own government. So they started developing their offshore sites in the Caspian Sea. Kashagan, which is off of the coast of Kazakhstan, is one of the biggest oil and gas fields that's been found since the 1970s. And it's been up and operating now for about a little more than 10 years. But all the countries, with the notable exception of Iran, have done what they can to try to take advantage of the fact that there's all these riches under the sea. So it's changed the environmental situation to the worse. I've seen reports that say that up to 50% of the fish in the Caspian Sea are now gone in the last few years. Alarmingly, I suppose, the sturgeon population is reportedly down by 90%. And of course, sturgeon are the source of caviar. So, it looks like not only will caviar be more expensive in the future, but it might not be available at all, at least the caviar they've been getting out of the Caspian Sea. So those are just a couple of examples. You can imagine this is compounded across the biosphere and the marine life, seals, birds, everything now are having trouble and showing reduction in population.
Right, and these impacts actually occurred in a relatively short frame of time. If things keep going the same trajectory that it does, what are we looking at?
Well, there's already signs that the shorelines are receding. We talked a little bit about the oil and gas, but there's also it's also important to remember that Russia has been developing the Volga River. The Volga River is the major source of water coming in from the Caspian Sea. I mean, it's essentially an inland lake. So all the water it's getting is coming from rivers or rainfall. As Russia has developed the Volga and hydropower plants, use of the waters for agriculture, it's led to a decrease in the amount of water that's coming out of the Volga and into the Caspian Sea at the moment. Climate change on top of that, that's compounding the problem too. So I'll give you an example from Turkmenistan. It's one of the littoral states that share the Caspian Sea. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, they started to build these artificial islands in the Caspian Sea off their resort area of Aza. They kind of they took a cue from Dubai and some of those countries down there. So they built these artificial islands off the coast of Turkmenistan, not so far. But now there's a couple of those islands that you can walk to because the water has gone down so much. So that's just one example. There's another element in this too that's important to mention too, that naturally people want to live in these areas because it's more temperate especially in Central Asia. The desert is just to the west of the Caspian Sea in Central Asia. So the population has been growing along the shoreline. Now, how do you get water to those people? Most of these countries have built desalination plants. But with the water decreasing now, there's also a question of are they going to have enough water for their populations that have been increasing along the Caspian shore? So there's a lot of things playing into this.
Right, and how do you see, them dealing with the situation? We already see some ports being abandoned, and, the whole kind of economy around it is also seeing a shift as well. Do you think that there's any chance that any sort of adaptation comes to fruition, or do you think that the change is going to come so rapidly that it's going to have a severe impact on the local community?
Well, the biggest problem is, the oil and gas development, and all these countries need the money. So I don't see them scaling back. I mean, every one of these countries will say that they're taking the environment into consideration when they start drilling and build their offshore sites. Iran, which is, I said earlier, hasn't really done much with the Caspian Sea, is just now starting to explore its section of the Caspian Sea, which is the deepest part of the Caspian Sea. So you can expect that in the very near future, Iran will start exploiting its gas and oil resources in its sector of the Caspian Sea too. It's hard to tell them to stop because they need the money. Obviously, that would be the solution: is to say let's suspend operations for a couple of years until we can do better studies and figure out a way to create some kind of balance between use of the hydrocarbons in the Caspian Sea and preserving the biosphere of the Caspian Sea. But everyone needs the money. On top of that, renewables are making huge inroads in the world markets today, too. So if you do have gas and oil and you think you can get money from it, you really have to get it now. 20 or 30 years from now, there might not be such a need for natural gas and oil as there is today. So you can't really tell these countries to stop, even though it would be prudent if they had time to do it. So unfortunately, the prognosis at the moment is continuation of the same trends that we're seeing today. The water's going to get lower. The temperatures will get hotter. Because the Caspian Sea is so salinated, as the water recedes, it leaves salt deposits on the shore, which of course will be picked up by the wind and blown inland, affecting the agricultural lands inland too. There's unfortunately no good news at the moment coming out of that region.
And are there any international players that have any sort of vested interest to see the Caspian Sea being preserved? Or do you think that, things will just keep going the way it does because, nobody really give enough emphasis to the issue?
Of course, all the states that are on the Caspian Sea have an interest in preserving it. So you would think that they would be working in concert. Unfortunately, once again, oil and gas concerns are priority, and preserving the Caspian Sea is secondary. But hopefully they'll get to a point where they realize that this is a horrible situation. Now, for Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, the two Central Asian states that share the Caspian Sea, this is something that they have visible evidence of what could happen. The Aral Sea was once one of the biggest inland bodies of water. It's just east of the Caspian Sea. It's 90% dried out now. Now, obviously, the Caspian Sea is a much bigger body of water than the Aral Sea, but people are already starting to make these dire predictions that the way they're going, the Caspian Sea will share the same fate as the Aral Sea, and could be greatly reduced to the point where it's uninhabitable for marine life. The pollution, again, the salt, the things that come out of there are going to be devastating for the countries that share the shoreline. Inevitably, I would think they would have to get together and try to come up with some solution. But right now, their main concerns are monetary. And unfortunately, that means continuing with the work they've been doing in the Caspian Sea for the last 30 years.
Is there a point in which the damage is going to outweigh the benefits of gas and oil that's coming out of the Caspian Sea to, give them an incentive to reverse? And if it does, do you think that it would be too late?
Those warnings are out there now. They're reaching the point where it might be impossible to recover from what's happening to the Caspian Sea now. Again, you would like to think that these governments would understand the threat that they're facing and do something, get together again. I mean, there's been several Caspian summits, but unfortunately, they were all about figuring out where the national sectors of each country were, what it was like for shipping across the Caspian Sea. Some use of hydrocarbons, obviously, and development of hydrocarbons, but very little about preservation of the sea. There's massive die-offs of seals. There's a population of seals that live out there too, and we're seeing that more and more often. Birds are also dying off in some of these regions, and they wash ashore. And you would think that all these things would set the alarm bells ringing in all the countries. But for now, anyway, it seems like it's a concern, but it's not a pressing issue where they think they have to take any kind of immediate action. There are some people who are willing to have gone out there and said, look, it's cyclical. This is the other theory. It's cyclical. There was a time in the 1970s where the Caspian Sea was shrinking, and they were talking about having to preserve the Caspian Sea. And then in the early 1990s, it's not only filled up, but it started to expand a little bit. And all of a sudden, they were looking at flooding and having to move buildings away from the shore. Now we're going back. So there are people who argue that what's happening now is part of probably an ancient trend that just hasn't been monitored for long enough, and that there is a expansion and contraction of the Caspian Sea that happens naturally. Now, most scientists would say no. If once you add in the population growth, the exploitation of the hydrocarbons in there, the climate change on top of that this is a trend that is headed only in one direction, is becoming irreversible. It's not part of a cyclical thing that's going on in the region, where if we just wait for 10 years, all of a sudden some of the water will start coming back. Again, looking at Russia and its use of the Volga River, if they continue to use it as they are now and expand that, there's no hope for more water reaching the Caspian Sea, and that means that it's just going to dry out.
Right. I actually do want to touch on Russia's action when it comes to all of this. Building a hydropower plant upstream is going to severely limit the water that's going to come downstream. But do you think that they have any sort of incentive to make sure that the deterioration of the Caspian Sea is, well, alleviated, or the incentive's just not there?
Again, it's hard to get in the minds of the Kremlin policymakers. Sometimes you would think that this would be obvious and they would be doing something about it. I thought it was interesting that the first really dire prognosis of the Caspian Sea came from Iran. And they were the ones that laid the blame right at Russia's doorstep. They did a long study and released it, and it found that Russia's overuse of the Volga River was the biggest cause of the desiccation of the Caspian Sea at the moment. So possibly some of the other countries, the other four, might put some pressure on Russia. Russia, of course, is a big country. It's got Pacific Ocean, Baltic Sea. There's a lot of outlets for them, and they do a lot of maritime traffic. Now, if you're Turkmenistan or Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, for that matter, your maritime ventures, your shipping is all on the Caspian Sea. You don't have another outlet to an ocean directly on your shore. So for them, it's much more important than it would be for Russia, certainly, and also for Iran, which is on the Persian Gulf. The source of water is vital. It's vital to keep the climate change moderated to a certain extent. You need that big body of water out there. The more it shrinks, the hotter it's going to get on the shore regions of these areas. And again, I would just mention, that immediately, not very far from the shore of Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, the desert starts and extends for a long time. Now that's, a long ways to the east. If the Caspian continues to shrink, the deserts will also expand further east, and that'll create settlement problems in Central Asia.
Right, it does seem like the situation is dire indeed. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Right, thanks for the invitation.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. An Italian court has ordered the extradition of a Ukrainian suspected of involvement in the 2022 sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines. He is to be sent to Germany.
The suspect in question, Serhiy Kuznetsov, was a member of the Ukrainian armed forces at the time of the explosion, but has so far denied any involvement with the operation. His lawyer has already said that he intends to appeal the extradition. He argues that his client is entitled to immunity under international law due to his military status. German prosecutors say that a Ukrainian cell of 6 people carried out the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines in September 2022. The prosecutors have accused Kuznetsov of using forged documents to rent a yacht that was later linked to the explosions that took place at the pipelines. Kuznetsov himself claims he was in Ukraine at the time of the explosions.
The European Union has indefinitely postponed adoption of its 19th package of sanctions against Russia. It is currently unclear when the package will be finalized and what the holdup is.
Sanctions are one of the most effective ways that the EU has been able to hit back at Russia over its illegal invasion of Ukraine. Kiev has often pushed for increasingly tight sanctions, which would cripple the Russian economy and through it, Moscow's ability to wage war. The news that the latest package has been postponed has been received despondently by Kiev and its allies. Some EU member states have been pushing for new sanctions to also include more restrictions on visas for Russian citizens, in addition to the typical economic measures. The halt in the 19th sanctions package comes as the United States has also been pressuring NATO members to cease purchasing oil from the Russians. US President Donald Trump has declared readiness to impose new sanctions of his own should all allies come to an agreement and follow suit.
Estonia is bolstering its fortifications against Russia even further. This time, Estonian authorities have made the decision to dig a 40-kilometer trench meant to stop Russian tanks.
Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, the Baltic states have been reforming and improving their defense and security against Moscow. Estonia in particular has been hard at work developing a sweeping defense effort, which will include not just a 40-kilometer anti-tank trench, but also as many as 600 bunkers on the country's southeastern border. These new measures are to be completed by 2027. The entire defense line will extend some 100 kilometers along the country's eastern border and be about 40 kilometers deep inland. The entire border does not have to be as heavily fortified, as Estonian authorities point out that the northern parts of the country have some excellent natural defences in the form of the Narva River and Lake Peipus. Tallinn has also been closely coordinating its defence effort not just with other Baltic states, but also with the North Atlantic Alliance as a whole.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to DPP World.